Hey guys, welcome back. It's your girl Sade and welcome to Sade's Mix. If you're new here, hi, welcome. And if you're returning, thank you so much. Today's video, we're going to be discussing one of New York's most prolific serial killers, Joel Rifkin. Have you heard of him? Well, I hadn't heard about him either, and I was actually drawn into his story. But before we get started, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring that bell. That way you're notified when I upload any content. So this video was actually recommended by YouTube's algorithm. And sometimes, you get some really good hits off of there. And me and my best friend, hey bestie, I'm gonna leave her Instagram link down below. She does custom shirts. Check her out. She's pretty awesome. But me and my best friend, we are New York natives and we had never heard of Joel Rifkin before. And after watching that documentary about him, I can honestly say I can see why he is being discussed now this week on the Oxygen channel for serial killers. But enough rambling, let's get right into it. Joel David Rifkin was born on January 20th, 1959, and he was a byproduct of an unwanted pregnancy. Not much is really known about his biological parents, but what is known is that on February 14th of 1959, Joel was adopted by his parents, Bernard and Janine Rifkin, and the family would eventually settle in East Meadow, Long Island. They were considered an upper-class family. It was said that Joel was a very bright child, but he was extremely shy and eccentric. Joel had an IQ of 128, but still sadly struggled through school due to his learning disabilities, which was dyslexia. He was also constantly teased on a regular basis, and his nickname growing up was the Turtle due to poor posture and his slow gait. It's also said that he did poorly in sports as well, and he had a terrible relationship with his father because his father, in contrast to his son, was into sports and did extremely well in school. Despite having this learning difficulties and constantly being bullied on a daily basis, Joel was actually able to finish high school, and he did enroll in college as well. But sadly, Joe would never finish college. He would actually enroll for photojournalism and would periodically enroll and leave and come back. He would do this for 12 years, and I believe 4 different colleges. And he was just unable to obtain any degree. Before Joel left for college, it said that that summer Joel went to go pick up his first sex worker. And here is when Joel's life kind of just spiraled out of control. His addiction for sex workers was enormous. Joel was looking for a new partner daily, and he said that he had hundreds upon hundreds of sex workers without anyone ever noticing. In February of 1987, tragedy would strike the Rifkin family. Joel's father, Bernard, would commit suicide due to his enduring pain from prostate cancer. Joel's dad just really couldn't handle the pain anymore, and he decided that this was his only option. And this really fueled Joel's depression and thirst for sex workers. After his father's passing, it said that Joel just continued right on nightly picking up sex workers and bringing them to seedy hotels or even bringing them back to his home in East Meadows, Long Island. Then, 6 months after Joel's dad passing away, August 22nd of 1987, Joel was actually arrested for soliciting a sex worker. I'm not going to use the term prostitute because they're now referred to as sex workers, although all articles refer to them as prostitutes, whatever. But yeah, Joel was picked up for soliciting a sex worker, and he quickly made sure that he was going to hide this from his family. He He paid the fine that was provided, and he hid any evidence that came from his arrest. Now, Joe decided that he wasn't going to look around his area for any more sex workers. He didn't want to get caught and he didn't want to get ratted out. So what Joe decided to do was that he was going to look for sex workers in the city, predominantly in Lower Manhattan and or in Brooklyn. It's really unclear exactly when Joel's obsession took a wrong turn, but Joel started to morbidly fantasize about inflicting harm on these sex workers. He was very fascinated on violence, murder, and during this process, Joe started collecting more and more articles about murdered prostitutes or murdered sex workers. He started researching serial killers and was very much invested on who was committing these crimes. Joe became so obsessed that he started researching about the then Green River Killer, who was unidentified but is now known as Gary Ridgway, and New York native, the Genesee River Killer, who was both active during the time. Genesee River, he was later identified as Arthur Shawcross. I'll have pictures of them. Now, after Joel's dad's passing, it would take 2 years before Joe decided to act on his urges and impulses and would actually commit his first crime. Then March of 1989 came around, and Joel could no longer suppress the morbid thoughts that he was having. And unfortunately, opportunity did rear its ugly head. Joel's mother took a trip out of state for a business trip, leaving Joel behind. And Joel decided that this was going to be the time that he was going to act out on his murderous impulses. What is known is that Joel did pick up a young sex worker. The two did exchange in sexual relations. He did bring her back home to his house as well. And then after the act of sex was performed, the young lady did ask Joe if he could take her to go get more drugs. And this angered Joe so much that he picked up a souvenir missile, and I'm going to put a picture of it for you guys, and proceeded to bludgeon her to death. Then he realized that she wasn't dead and proceeded to strangle her until she was dead. Then Joe, and I don't know what he was thinking, then Joe decides, I know what he was thinking. He was thinking, oh crap, I have to get rid of this body. Joel decides to clean up the area that the struggle had happened, make sure that there's no blood anywhere, putting everything back in order so that when his mom came back, there wouldn't be any signs of a struggle. He then proceeded to take a nap, and then he went to this poor young sex worker's body. He dismembered her body. He decapitated her head. And he went as far as cutting off her fingertips so that it would be harder for her to be identified. And he proceeded to rip out her teeth as well. He then placed her head in a paint can. I don't know what the hell he was thinking, guys. And her other various body parts. And he proceeded to drive to various areas in Manhattan and in New Jersey and scattered her body parts everywhere. Her head was actually found on March 5th of 1989 at a golf course in Hopewell, New Jersey. But sadly, this victim would go unidentified until Joe was actually apprehended in 1993. Now, not much is said about how Joe felt or what the hell he was thinking after he committed this crime, but what is known is that he did not commit his next murder until about a year or a year and a half later after his first murder. Now, we're not sure because there was a lot of publicity around the headless sex worker, And like I said, they didn't know who she was. They just found the head and various body parts, but DNA testing was not as advanced as it is now. And I think from what I was reading, Joe was really spooked by the publicity, and it even made him change his MO. So a year and a half later, Joe decided to act on his murderous impulses again, and he would proceed to get another sex worker. Same thing. He brought her back to his house when his mother was not around, and he proceeded to also beat and strangle this sex worker as well. He also dismembered her body, but this time Joel remembered from his previous killing how they found her body. So what Joel decided to do was place her body parts in buckets and pour or place concrete in it and throw the body parts into the Hudson River. Sadly, her body was never recovered, and Joe was ecstatic. There was no publicity. He was literally getting away with murder. Less than 3 months after his second killing, he would proceed to kill another sex worker. This time, they're all just as terrible, right? This time, Joe would say that this killing in particular was very strange to him. He said that after they had relations, he asked the young lady if she would like to die, and she proceeded to say yes, in which Joe proceeded to strangle her to death. And Joe said that she put up no fight. She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She accepted her fate, and Joe killed her. Now, the biggest difference, and Joe almost messed up, was that this was on a public place. So what does Joe do? He decides to pull a book out of like one of these horror movies. He gets a trunk and he mushes her body into the trunk and throws her body into the Hudson River as well. So he would have gotten caught because, hey, where's the young lady that he couldn't leave the body here? So he stuffed her body in a trunk of a suitcase and dumped her body in the Hudson River as well. Joe would go on to murder 17 sex workers in the same fashion. He would beat and strangle them to death. Some of them were dumped in the Brooklyn Barge Canal, some in the East Rivers, and there are said to be 4 victims that were placed in oil drums and dumped into the rivers around New York City as well. So Joe was just going around picking up anybody and everybody. He had no type besides the fact that they were sex workers, and he was just killing them for his own sadistic pleasures. Then fate would happen. Joe would commit his last murder in June of 1993. Now, after he killed this young sex worker, Joe proceeded to leave her dead body in his mother's garage in a wheelbarrow for 3 days. And after those 3 days, her body started quickly decomposing. And the neighbors were like, what the hell is this funky ass smell, right? So Joe knew that he had to get rid of this body really quickly before police were involved or before he got caught by his own mother. And I found out during the research that for 2 days, his mother was driving around with the young lady's dead body in her trunk. She had no idea what Joe was doing or what he was using her car for at night. But as stated, on June 28th, 1993, Joe decided to remove the young lady's body from his mother's car, put her in his car that he was working on and had been working on for the past 3 days, and decided to take her body so that he can go dump it in the Hudson River. If it wasn't for two diligent state troopers for noticing that, hey, this car right here ain't got no license tags, let's pull him over. If it wasn't for them, he would still be killing today. So as I stated, these state troopers saw Joel driving his car late at night in the wee hours of the morning. He didn't have any tags. He wasn't speeding or anything, but that's a small violation. So they signal whoop, whoop, for him to pull over, and Joel takes off. High-speed chase commences, and Joel is apprehended in front of the courthouse because he crashed his car. Now, when the officer got up to Joe's car, he immediately smelled the scent of decomposing flesh. And if anyone has smelled this smell or smelled like a dead animal in the street, you know what this smells like. And when the officer popped the trunk, there was the young sex worker, and Joe was immediately apprehended, brought into the courts same day, right? Sorry, it kind of shook just then. And he was interrogated for 8 hours. And at first, Joe would not say anything, kept his mouth shut. He said he didn't want to talk unless there was any counsel around him. But after 8 hours, Joe finally and sadly talked about all of the 17 murders that he had committed since 1989. He went into such details by drawing maps and explaining exactly what he did to each body. Joel stressed the importance that he did have sex with them, he did murder them, but he was not guilty of this crime. When I heard that this man was pleading not guilty because he didn't have his rights read to him, and that his confession should have been thrown out the table because that's what his legal counsel was saying, I was floored, right? I was very upset because this man would have went on and would have continued killing if it, as I stated, if it wasn't for those two police officers who did pull him over. But to sit there and have the dead body in your car and for you to say that you did not commit these murders and that your rights were violated, these women's lives were taken away from them. And I think he's the most disgusting person I've ever heard of. And I'm actually sad that I didn't hear about him sooner. And, trial went on. He did plead not guilty, but he was actually found guilty of 9 confirmed cases, although he did admit to 17. And Joel was given 238 years, the max sentences that he could receive. 9 life sentences. Now, I'm not the one for the death penalty. I don't like the death penalty. That's my personal opinion. But Mr. Rifkin here, this is a very disturbed young man, and half of me would like to see him get help. But we should have him underneath the jail. He gave no remorse, and at his trial, he said that he was sorry to the victims' families for what he did, but he gave no remorse when explaining, and in great detail did he explain what he did to each victim. So I personally don't think he was truly sorry. Joel Rifkin will never see the light of day ever again, but he is constantly in the news. In 1994, he was in the news because he got into an argument with another convicted felon named Cole Fernandez, Fernandez, I believe, in which Colin punched him in the mouth because they were talking about who had the most kills. Yes, you heard me. They were bragging about their kills. And that, guys, is the gross story of Joel Rifkin. I did not want to talk about each one of his victims because, as I said, his MO was the same: strangulation, beating, sex workers. But leave your comments down below. I mean, what do you guys think about Mr. Rifkin? And do you think that we should be giving media attention to these serial killers? I personally think that for Joel's case, I have a hard time with L's, that with Joel's case, we should not give him any media attention. It seems that he thrives on the idea that people are talking about him or thinking about him. He's very fascinating, and I kind of wish that there was more out there about his biological parents. There's not much to really say. Is this a genetic defect, or was he just born evil, you know? And not much is said about his childhood besides being bullied. Like, there's so many gaps in Joel's life. Like, it's so hard to say, like, where he went wrong. But what we know for sure, the fact that he was so smart and incapable of really fitting in, that's hard for a kid. And the fact that he had dyslexia, and although it wasn't a new term, it wasn't something that he was properly diagnosed with, also made his childhood hard. I'm not saying that we should not feel bad for the serial killer for having a messed up childhood, but it makes sense for us to understand where they come from so that we can, as a community, prevent things like this. That's all I have for you guys. I hope you enjoyed the story of Joel Rifkin. What did you think about him? I still can't figure out where he went wrong. I mean, maybe it was the constant bullying, and maybe it was his bad relationship with his father, but I really can't see anything that would say that he had such a crappy childhood. But let me know in the comment section down below, or who you guys would like me to talk about in the future. But for now, guys, be safe out there, wear your mask, and I will be seeing you guys later. Bye.